And the Leader of the UKIP Group, Neil Hamilton.
Presiding Officer. All members, I'm sure, are pleased, albeit in varying degrees, to see the return safely of the First Minister from the United States of America. I read the written statement which was published this morning by the Welsh Government of what he did on his trip there. I was quite surprised to see that there was no mention of any meetings with members of the United States government administration. And on the very day that President Trump announced that he was intending to see tariffs introduced on steel from all parts of the world, the First Minister was meeting the person who lost to President Trump in the presidential election, Hillary Clinton. Shouldn't the First Minister be more interested in playing power politics than the politics of impotence?
Well, I'm not sure whether the leader of UKIP thinks I should have broken down the door of the White House in order to demand a meeting with the President of the US. It doesn't work that way, I can assure him. But of course, the issue of steel tariffs puts a very big hole in his view of the world, the post-Brexit world. Because we were told by him and by others that the way was now open for us to do a deal, a free trade agreement with the US. And yet one of the first things the US does is impose tariffs on steel, which we actually export to the US. Not a very friendly action, is it?
The First Minister knows that the United States' concern about steel exports to the United States is not with Britain, because actually there's been an 11% reduction in the volume and value of steel that is exported from the UK to the US in the last 2 years. The quarrel is with countries like China, that produces half the world's steel, and where there's massive excess capacity equivalent to the entire consumption of steel in the United States over 1 year. Countries like Vietnam, Canada, which exports to the United States 10 times as much steel as we do. And the President is concerned about the effect of NAFTA with Canada and Mexico. We happen to be caught up in the slipstream of all this. And the response of the European Union to the President's announcement is likely to be disastrous whilst we are within the customs union, because the European Commission now says it wants to retaliate by introducing tariffs on cars, perhaps, and other manufactured goods, which could have massive impacts upon British workers' jobs and Welsh workers' jobs over many parts of the country. If we had an independent trade policy outside the customs union of the EU, we would perhaps be able to strike our own deals with other countries, in particular the United States, which is our biggest single trading partner, apart from the 27 countries of the EU.
Well, let me try and educate him. First of all, US businesses want to see free trade. That much is true. The US government does not. It does not. These steel tariffs are being imposed on all countries. He may be right in saying that China and other countries is the main target, but this is a blunt instrument that's being used against all. No one has said in the US administration that the UK will be exempt in some way or the EU will be exempt in some way. This is a tariff against all. Now, he then criticises the European Union for suggesting that there may be retaliation. What does he expect? Is he saying that if the UK was not in the EU, there would be no action by the UK government? Because if he wants a definition of impotence, he's just given it.
The question is whether we should attempt to solve these problems by diplomacy and sensible talking to other parties, or engage in the kind of megaphone bellicosity that has come out of Brussels in the last few days. And there are very serious issues at stake here. Other countries like Germany and Spain export far more steel to the United States than Britain does. So Britain is not the cause of the current problems and concerns in the United States. And whilst it's true, the announcement which has been made so far is on the basis of this tariff applying universally throughout the world. The details of what's proposed are not yet published, of course, and those are up for negotiation. The US Commerce Secretary has said as much. So I revert to the first question I asked the First Minister. Does he not think it would have been sensible to open some channels of communication, even if it wasn't at the level of the President of the United States himself, but who is very pro-British? It's obvious from the things that he said in the time that he's been in office. Well, members can laugh, Members can laugh, but the United States is globally a vastly important influence upon the economy, and in particular on jobs and the livelihoods of people in this country. We should surely want to get on as well as we could with the leader of the free world and with one of our most important trading partners.
Well, he talks about megaphone bellicosity without any sense of irony and blames Brussels for it. I have to say, the reality is that the current US government, and I don't believe this is a view shared by US businesses at all, nor those who invest in Wales, the current US government wants to impose 24% tariffs on steel from the UK. I agree with him. The UK is not the main target for these tariffs, but it's caught up with it anyway. Now, the Prime Minister herself has spoken to the President to no effect at all in terms of these tariffs being lifted. Now, is he really saying that if the US imposes tariffs on goods coming into the US, that the UK and the EU should do nothing at all in response? I'm afraid that's not the way the world works. I prefer to see a situation where the US has freer trade with the EU and, by definition, the UK. But it may have escaped his attention that the US has the most protectionist government it's had for many, many decades. It is not interested in free trade deals that are not wholly of benefit to the US. When I was in the US, one of the themes that emerged was that the NAFTA negotiations are based on the US demanding everything for itself, and no flexibility as far as Canada and Mexico are both concerned. You cannot be a protectionist government on the one hand and then say you want to have free trade on the other. I very much regret the announcement that was made by the US President in terms of steel tariffs. It may have an effect on the Welsh steel industry, but to sit back and do nothing is the most impotent response imaginable.
Thank you. We now move back to questions on the order.